Hello, beloveds, and welcome to Christian Emotional Recovery, a podcast for those who are survivors of childhood trauma, emotional neglect, and narcissistic abuse. This podcast is hosted by Rachel Leroy, a college professor and trauma survivor. Many of us spend years trying to heal and don't get anywhere. We don't always target the trauma itself, which is so often what keeps us stuck. This podcast is where faith meets science. Rachel is an emotional healing expert with 20 years of experience applying healing modalities that helped her start making progress after nothing else worked. She'll show you how to do the same. Each week, we'll cover a topic that will show you how to heal trauma for good. Please check out our website and show notes at christianemotionalrecovery.com and join the Facebook community, Trauma Survivors Unite, Christian Emotional Recovery.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Christian Emotional Recovery, the podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Leroy, and this is episode 6, season 3. We're moving right along. Episode 6, season 3. And this episode will be Inner Child Work, Reparenting Yourself, Reclaiming Your Childhood. Inner Child Work, Reparenting Yourself, Reclaiming Your Childhood. And this is episode 6, season 3. Now, I cover a lot of different topics on the podcast, and the purpose of that is not just to be like a classroom and to teach in general, but so you know these different strategies that can help you heal from the body and heal in ways that will allow you to actually move forward in your healing. The most effective, research-based strategies are the ones that I try to share with you here. So I'm constantly learning about new strategies, updating myself on old strategies, and so forth and so on, and combining your Christian walk with science and with psychology to help you to maximize your healing so you can live the life that God intended you to live. And so real quickly, check out the YouTube channel if you haven't. The YouTube channel is also called Christian Emotional Recovery, and I will link it in the show notes. Keep in mind that the YouTube channel does not have the same material as the podcast. Generally speaking, I do cross over a couple of times a year with an episode, but the YouTube channel tends to have a shorter episodes, if you want to call them that, shorter videos than the podcast in general. Some of them are around the same length, and they cover more specialized topics. So check out the YouTube channel because it's on the same stuff, but it just focuses on more specialized type subtopics of healing childhood emotional abuse, childhood emotional neglect, childhood trauma, and other forms of abuse and neglect, and narcissistic abuse. So check that out. Check out the YouTube channel. I'm trying to grow it. I want to be able to continue to do the work I do. It can be a struggle sometimes because I do have a lot of health issues and I need to also pay my bills like you do. I'm sure you understand. And with that in mind, I put a lot of time and energy into the podcast, which I love doing. But if you'd like to support the work that I do, check out the Patreon account. And Patreon is basically a site where creators like YouTubers, podcasters, artists, and similar type people have a place where their followers can support them financially. And I work part-time, but I do struggle some. And so it is helpful. And I don't try to, just keep emphasizing that, but it gets hard sometimes. And, I do deal with certain health issues and makes it difficult to work full-time a lot of the time. And so if you can support the podcast in any way, there are monthly ways you can support it, $5, $10, and $25 a month. And I'm going to try to get something going where if you want to make a one-time donation, you can also do that if you feel more comfortable with that. But any help helps me to pay for the expenses of the podcast, and it's much appreciated. And I don't want to keep rambling on about the different places that you can go, but I want to make sure you're aware of the different forms of support that the platform provides, including the Facebook page. The Facebook page is Christian Emotional Recovery, and so go check that out where you can get support and weekly memes that encourage you and help you to continue on the healing path, and you can connect with other survivors and people that are healing just like you. So check that out as well. And then lastly, check out ChristianEmotionalRecovery.com, where you can find all kinds of other free resources, and you can find the podcast as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into inner child work, reparenting yourself and reclaiming your childhood. And you've probably heard of inner child work. Maybe you've even done some. As Christians, I think that, in my opinion, I don't see any problem with doing inner child work. And if you want to make God the focus within your inner child work, you can allow God to be the parent, and then you contact your inner child, because what you'll find, and I'll come back to this in just a minute, is that having an inner child, you don't just have one inner child, you have lots of inner children, so to speak. That doesn't mean you have multiple personalities. What it does mean is that you have different things that happen to you at different times when you were a child, that maybe you have arrested development and unresolved trauma in those areas. And even beyond trauma, just being playful and communicating with your inner child can be something that happens in different phases in your life. One inner child might be 3, another might be 9, another one might be 12, and another one might be 15. But I wanted to start with a quote that sums up what inner child work is, and it says, "What is truly special about inner child work is its intention to speak to our inner child through their language, a language that is emotionally based and embodied, rather than expressed through intellectual thoughts and words." That sums up inner child work more than anything I can think of. I cannot remember what source this is from, but I will put all the sources, including the one that this came from, in the show notes, so you can have more resources to read through and use. And even within those sources, there's a lot of other sources you can link to and check out as well. So check those out in the show notes. But let me read that again, because I think it's really important to note and to understand that when you do inner child work, it's in the body. Children don't operate from their intellect, right? They operate from their instincts. And so if you're healing in that place where you're doing inner child work more on your instincts, more from the body, then that is where the true healing happens in this case when you're doing inner child work. It says, "What is truly special about inner child work is its intention to speak to our inner child through their language, a language that is emotionally based and embodied, rather than expressed through intellectual thoughts and words." And what is inner child work, and why is it important? Well, there's a lot of research, therapy, and healing tools around inner child work. This is an area that's been widely explored, widely researched. So it is research-based, and it is generally accepted as a legitimate form of healing in psychology and in science, even though it's a little, it's one of those things where it's kind of slippery, but not in a bad way. It's just something that it's harder to pin down, if that makes sense. But inner child work is working with the younger parts of you that may be developmentally stuck because of trauma that occurred at those times in your life. And in some cases, just those past parts of yourself that need nurturing and reparenting. A lot of people think it's woo-woo and not research-based, but there's a lot of research that backs inner child work. And like I said, it's an accepted part of psychology and therapy. I wanted to include, to show you that it is science-based, so I included a National Institute of Health article, but I'm not really going to be using this article in the talk today because I want to keep it simpler, and this is a very sciencey article, but there's a National Institute of Health article, NIH article, and I will put it in the show notes. And if you want more articles on why childhood, inner child work is scientifically and psychologically based, you can see all those articles there. Now, that's not a comprehensive list. It's a sample of different research studies and similar type articles that article pulled from, just to show you that there is a lot of science behind this, a lot of studies behind this, and a lot of research behind this, and it's been going on for decades. So this is a well-established practice, and it's one that I think most people can be safe doing with the right tools, with the right strategies. As with anything, you need to be careful and be safe Follow God's guidance and discernment and pray about it. And of course, consult a professional as you're doing this work, especially if your trauma is very intense or very hard and very painful. It might be good, if possible, to seek a professional first, because you can do inner child work with a therapist or other licensed professional. So be sure to consult them as well. And so I wanted to go ahead and jump in a little more and talk about what inner child healing is and a brief definition. So there's an article in Positive Psychology, and it's called Inner Child Healing, 35 Practical Tools for Growing Beyond Your Past. And this is by Jeremy Sutton, and it's scientifically reviewed by Tiffany Sauber-Milachi. And it's Inner Child Healing, 35 Practical Tools for Growing Beyond Your Past in Positive Psychology. And a definition here, I'm reading straight from the article. If this one is geared towards therapists, but I've found that a lot of stuff geared towards therapists can be helpful as well. So don't worry about how it's addressed here. I still think that the definition is useful. So it says, if your client feels like they've spent their entire life attracting people who only bring drama and hurt with them, they could be right. Hurt people find other hurt people. And that's from Jackman 2020. It's a quote within a quote. And then it says, the wounded part, deep within, may be unconsciously choosing to be in relationship with other hurt people, and it may result from experiences they faced when growing up, feeling ignored, rejected, dismissed, or even abused, neglected, and traumatized. Also Jackman. Such wounds find an emotional space deep within, changing how clients see themselves and the world. As we age, we find our well-being both in the present, environment, family, friendships, and career, and in our past experiences, particularly our childhood. This inner child includes all the past hidden ages that made up one's life journey. I'll say that one again. This inner child includes all the past hidden ages that may have made up one's life journey. A psychosynthesis of all ages, each developmental stage forming one part of our overall self. And that's another source within this source, Schorblom or something like that, Schablom. 2016. Maintaining our present well-being requires us to keep the best aspect of each age alive. Nurturing the child is essential to relating to ourselves. Same person as before. And then continuing, this is like a citation, but it's synthesized into the Positive Psychology's own words. Managing the internal attachment system regulates how we think, perceive, and behave. Feeling listened to, heard, and understood with a more positive evaluation of our life history can increase a sense of well-being and play an essential role in treatment and empowerment. Same source. And then otherwise, memories of being alone, scared, and sad can surface as feelings of abandonment and trauma in early life that continue through adulthood. Almost done. Becoming more aware of the inner child through therapy and personal journey can help unearth the pain and ultimately offer healing. Acknowledging the inner child involves recognizing and accepting the things that caused pain in childhood, bringing them to light to understand their impact now. Ray Pohl. So that's another source that they used. So that was an inner child healing, a brief definition from Positive Psychology. So now that we know a little bit about inner child work and how it can be helpful, I wanted to read an article, just a couple of paragraphs from it called, it's in Psych Central, and it's called 10 Exercises to Heal Your Inner Child. Notice there's a lot of exercises on inner child work. There's a lot. So 10 Exercises to Heal Your Inner Child, and this is in Psych Central, and it is reviewed by Jocelyn Jelinek, and it is written by Tracy Peterson and Jamie Smith. Doing inner child work and what it entails, and how it's actually very respected form of doing healing work that actually gets to the root of the trauma. It says the Department of Veteran Affairs reports between 14 and 43% of children experience at least one traumatic event. No surprise there. Of these, up to 15% of girls and 6% of boys develop post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. People with a history of repeated abuse or neglect may experience complex trauma as adults. If you experience trauma as a young child, particularly if it involved your parents or living situation, inner child work might be right for you. This therapeutic technique allows you to work through the coping mechanisms you've developed along the way so you can finally connect with your authentic self. If you have experienced trauma, consider contacting a mental health professional. There are many effective therapies for trauma to help relieve post-traumatic stress. If you think inner child work could help you, you might reach out to a therapist specializing in the technique. Okay, so that's a good advice, and especially if you think inner child work might be helpful for you or you just want to learn more about it and you're not sure where to start. Also, you can check out the resources I've included here, and that will be a good place to start as well if you're not sure. Okay, so a little bit about the nature of inner child work. Keep in mind that the nature of inner child work is that there are, like I said earlier, inner children, so to speak, at different stages of your development, particularly from those stages where you may have had arrested development because of traumatic events, sustained ones especially, the times in your life when you experienced trauma, and the times when you may have faced repeated invalidation or emotional neglect. At times, your inner child might be 3, 9, 12, or 15, like I said before. The key is to feel into your body and see what comes up in terms of age. When something comes up, what age does it feel like? It will feel strange to do that. I've done this in therapy because one type of therapy that's very good at helping you do inner child work, I wouldn't say it's exactly like all inner child work, but you could consider it, is IFS, internal family systems. And that's where you contact different parts of yourself. Not all those parts are children ages, but keep in mind that a lot of them are. And so it's a matter of trusting yourself and going with it. You might even think it's fake to say, what age is this? 12, 2, or 2 might be a little young, but you get the idea. You might even think it's fake, like I said, and you're making it up, because I often did that in therapy. And I was taught, go with it, trust it, go with it. Your body knows. Trusting your body and what your inner child or children are trying to tell you takes practice and courage and building trust, dialogue, and feeling into the body with your inner child, okay? So keep in mind, I just wanted to throw that out there, that's a little bit about the nature of inner child work and something to keep in mind as you go along if you do it, okay? So I wanted to read a couple of paragraphs from a Time article, Time magazine. And I wanted to show you a concrete example of inner child work, because it's one thing to show you a concept, it's another thing to show it in practice. And I'm also going to share a little bit of my experience with inner child work. I don't like the podcast to be about me, but I do share from my experience. And that's why the whole podcast was started, to help people like me who are going through things and don't have the resources or the community or the empowerment or the education to help you to be able to find those things, so that I can follow God's call on my life and I can help you at the same time. The Time magazine article is called, "Why is Everyone Working on Their Inner Child?" Time magazine. And there is a couple of paragraphs that talk about, it just gives a good overview of inner child work, what it is, why it's a thing, so to speak. So I'm going to read the opening 2 paragraphs of this article. And this is the example I was talking about of inner child work. When Ellen Line started therapy in her late 20s, she was struggling in her marriage and with her perfectionist and people-pleasing tendencies. One day, her therapist asked her to envision her, quote, inner child, a metaphorical part of herself frozen in childhood, still clinging to the emotions, beliefs, and memories she had at that time. She saw a, quote, little girl sitting all alone and isolated in the bottom of a pit. How I'd often felt as a kid when I was ignored or sent to my room for having emotions, says Line, 34, who is now a psychotherapist based in Baltimore. Quote, my therapist asked me what I needed in that moment, and I said a hug. She asked me if I could imagine giving that little girl a hug. And it says, Line has been on a journey to heal her inner child ever since, realizing that I could support myself in the ways I needed, but my parents were incapable of, was a game changer, she said. Of course, this is not attacking anybody's parents. Everybody's parents are different, and, some were, I'll just be honest, horrible, and other ones just made mistakes and did the best they could. And I'm not condoning abuse or neglect, and your experiences are valid and real. If you have trauma, you have trauma. But I just wanted to give you an example of what inner child work may look like in action, okay? Why is inner child work so important? One other thing, and then I'm going to share my experience with inner child work and what reparenting yourself is and how it connects to inner child work as well. And then we'll talk about how you can know if you need to heal your inner child, and then different modes and types of inner child work, specific exercises that can help you heal, and how to add these to your daily healing practice. We won't spend a lot of time on any one of those, but those are the other areas of inner child work that we'll cover. I don't just like to tell you what something is, but also I want to give you strategies and show you how to put it into practice. That's the whole point, how to put it into practice. So a little bit about why inner child work is important. There's an article in mindbodygreen.com. So there's a section in the article. The Mind Body Green article is called What is Inner Child Work? A Guide to Healing Your Inner Child. And it's by Tiffany True, Trieu. And the article, the part where it talks about why is inner child work so important? Inner child healing, it says. It says, as adults, we walk around carrying wounds from our childhood, whether it's simple or complex trauma. We've talked about the difference between those two. If not, check out there's a podcast episode, I think in season 1, on complex trauma, CPTSD. But it says, from emotional neglect to physical abuse, many adults feel they're alone with these hurts and feelings, Phillips notes, and so they cover them up because they feel that's what other grown-ups do, in quotes. That's why inner child healing is so important, she says, to remind ourselves that we're not wrong or bad, to heal the shame that comes with just having feelings. By healing our inner child, we begin to create the safety and security our younger selves have always needed. By doing so, the positive traits of our inner child have room to shine. We unlock our natural gifts, our inner curiosity, and our limitless capacity to love. On the other hand, when we avoid addressing our past hurts and feel alone with them, they transform into behaviors destructive to ourselves and our environment, such as workaholism, alcoholism, or racism. When we heal the inner child, we heal generations. We heal the world. We literally affect one another. That's what co-regulation is, Phillips says. So it's talking about how important inner child work in terms of restoring ourselves is, and how it can actually be a gift to the world as well. And it also allows us to be able to be the person that God meant us to be, so we can do the work in this world that we feel God has called us to do. Now, I was talking about the importance of inner child work. Now, let me tell you a little bit about my experience with inner child work. My experience goes, I have known inner child work for a long time, and I've done a lot of meditations. And for me, this is just my experience. Meditations have been very helpful because it helps me to deal with that instinct area in the body. I can deal with the instinct area in the body. I've also done inner child work in the IFS therapy that I've done, and that's been very helpful because you work with parts, and a lot of those parts are inner child's, so to speak, at different ages. And I've done a lot of inner child meditations, and IFS isn't inner child work per se, but it is similar work. And the parts can be considered inner child work. Those parts are those different parts of you that come up, that have emotional resistance, that have trauma, that have experienced those things. And even the parts that try to protect those more vulnerable parts are parts. And so inner child work has been very helpful for me. It's a very powerful experience when you can, the self, that part of you that never changes, the part of you that doesn't have those traumas, the part of you that's always the same, when the self can nurture that inner child, and you can allow God to nurture you. And if you want, you can even, instead of the self, use God to nurture you. But part of the reason of using the self is not to be self-absorbed, not to put yourself above God or anything like that. The point is to build that trust and that relationship in yourself with yourself. And there are Christians I know that would tell you, you shouldn't do that. But in my opinion, this is just my opinion, you need to be able to trust yourself and to have that trust within yourself too. And God will help you build that trust and that healing. So it's partly a partnership with God, and it's also about building that inner trust where that adult, mature self part of you can nurture the inner child. You might picture yourself sitting under a tree or in a childhood place where you felt safe, talking to that inner child, giving them a hug. And it sounds kind of corny, and there are people that would probably make fun of it, but it's so powerful and it works. You might do a meditation where your inner child is in a dark place and you come and sit down and comfort them while they cry, and you let them talk and you listen to them and you comfort them and you remind them, now I am here with you. I'm here with you now. And remind them, we're so-and-so years old now. We're 30 or 50 years old now, or whatever the case may be. And I can take care of you, and I will love you, and I will nurture you, and I will protect you. And God is here, and He will love you and nurture you and protect you. You don't have to be in that place anymore. You're safe. And let the inner child express its needs and its concerns and try to fulfill those needs. That's kind of what my experience has been, and how it's been a powerful experience for me. And like I said, I know a lot of people may not feel comfortable doing this. A lot of people, it might not be for you. If it isn't, then don't do it. You know, there's a lot of other strategies you can do, but I'm just telling you what my experience has been, okay? And it's been very powerful and very visceral in a lot of ways. And it might be the most powerful form of healing work from childhood trauma, and one of the most powerful ones from childhood emotional neglect. But it gets to our childhood trauma at a soul level. It gets to our unconscious mind, and it gets to our trauma at a soul level. So there's this phrase that goes around a lot here that you've probably heard, and I've mentioned it a couple of times too, and that's called reparenting yourself. This is the next section in the podcast. Reparenting yourself, what is it, and how does it connect to your inner child work? Now, when we talk about reparenting, this is not to dishonor our own parents, and if we had good parents or parents that tried, it's not to undo or to undermine any good things they instilled in us. Reparenting is where we take the gaps that are in our childhood. And in some cases, I know some people did have bad parents that were horrible. So there's a wide variety of people that reparent themselves, and a wide variety of experiences in childhood where people reparent themselves. But it's not about disrespecting our parents or hating them or resenting them. It's about filling in those gaps and relearning what we need to relearn. And so I want to read a little bit about reparenting yourself. What is it? Why do we do it? How does that connect to inner child work? So I'm going to read the first two paragraphs of a reparenting article from the CPTSD Foundation, Reparenting to Heal the Wounded Inner Child by Shirley Davis. CPTSD Foundation, Reparenting to Heal the Wounded Inner Child. And what is reparenting? It says some children live in environments where their parents are unavailable, either physically or emotionally. In some cases, as the development of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, children are harmed by those who were supposed to protect and guard them. In fact, the following quote is valid. The term reparenting designates a therapeutic operation by means the patient is offered new parental figures with positive characteristics. And that's Del Casale et al. And it says these inner children need reparenting. Adults can't return to their childhood and begin again. So basically, reparenting means giving yourself what you did not receive from childhood from the original parents. Reparenting involves learning to give your wounded inner child the love, respect, and dignity they deserve when you were young. Sometimes survivors do not like the notion that someone else cannot reparent them. They balk at the knowledge that no one else can do the job but themselves. While it may not be what we adults want, it says, learning to become our own parent is the only option to overcome bad parenting we received in the past. And so, yeah, that's a reality that's harsh, and it sucks, and it's not fair. You're right, it's not fair. Some people got that kind of parenting, and nobody's parents are perfect, but some people didn't get what they needed. And you have to go back and do that yourself? That sucks. That's so unfair. No doubt about it. But that is the reality. And the best thing that we can do is to give ourselves the best that we can for ourselves, because we deserve that. We always deserve that. We didn't deserve any less than people who don't have to go back and do this work. So yeah, it's not fair, but dwelling on that doesn't help. Focusing on just learning to find those skills and develop them, it's partly allowing ourselves to be nurtured as the inner child, and also nurturing ourselves by reparenting ourselves from our adult self. Does that make sense? So that was from the CPTSD Foundation, and that was Reparenting Yourself. Another way that we can use inner child work and reparenting to heal ourselves is by meditating on, reciting, and reflecting on scriptures that remind us of our relationship with our Abba Father. We have a Father who does love us and will help us heal our past wounds. We're joint heirs with Christ, right? We're his children. Even the ones that happened to us as a vulnerable child, those wounds. So we can heal whether the wounds occurred at 5, 15, 35, or 50 years ago. And so using the meditation, journaling, reflection, prayer, affirmation, and other techniques to get these into our minds, speaking directly to our inner child, and picturing our inner child receiving these verses is also powerful. So you actually don't just recite these verses, but also picture yourself receiving them. Check out, I know it's kind of a silly name, but there's a place called Jolly Quotes. I was just looking for some scriptures that had a more personal, you're safe, God is your comforter, he's your father, he's your parent, he's there for you, he loves you, he is your supporter. And that's all scriptural, right? And so the verses that I found was in a place called Jolly Quotes. jollynotes.com, daily inspiration for joyful living. And this one is God is my Father, encouraging Bible verses about God being our Father. And so I thought that these were especially poignant to help connect us to that concept of the inner child being safe, of having a loving parent. Our Heavenly Father is the ultimate parent, right? And some of us could almost picture the Holy Spirit as being sort of that mother figure of a sense, so to speak. But let me just quote a couple of them. I'm just going to pick a couple of random ones. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. John 1:12. So that you have not received a spirit that makes you fearful slaves. Instead, you received God's Spirit when he adopted you as his own children. Now we call him Abba Father. Romans 8:15. That Abba Father is an intimate form, like almost like saying Daddy God. And then another one, beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared, but we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, because we shall see him as he is. And that's 1 John 3:2. Another one, Ephesians 4:6, our God and Father of all, who is all, over all and through all and in all. And it just goes on to show our relationship with God as our Father, as our friend, as our comforter, as our parent, as someone who is there for us in times of trouble, in good times, in bad times, at all times. Never leaves us nor forsakes us. There's another one, 2 Corinthians 6:18. I will be a father to you, and you will be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty. So those are some of the ones that connect with our personal relationship with God, and how he can also help heal our inner child if we meditate on those scriptures and picture ourselves as inner children receiving those and being healed by those. So those can be done in a lot of ways through journaling, meditation, and other visualizations as well. And so lastly, I wanted to talk about how do you know if you need to heal the inner child, and then talk about some specific strategies to help you with that. So the symptoms of that show that you might need to heal the inner child. I've talked a lot about symptoms in a lot of videos, and a lot of them are very similar. Depression, anxiety, certain other kinds of behaviors that most of us tend to have if we're in a trauma support group. I did want to talk about it briefly just so it gives you an idea. Almost everyone can benefit from inner child work though, but especially those who've experienced childhood trauma, complex trauma from childhood CPTSD, and childhood emotional neglect especially. And I think narcissistic abuse, especially as a child, those can all be helpful. So I wanted to read a little section from the Mind Body Green article again, and it's signs your inner child needs healing, very briefly, and just give you some symptoms to show that you may need to do inner child work. Okay? Very briefly, Mind Body Green. Okay. Signs your inner child needs healing, Mind Body Green. The signs listed below are symptoms connected back to original attachment wounds. So this is about attachment wounds. And if you want to learn more about attachment styles, I have a YouTube video. I'm not sure if it's come out yet, but if it hasn't, it should be out not too long after this video, after this podcast has aired, and it should be attachment styles. If you type that into my channel, it should come up, or look it up. Okay? And that's in YouTube. So feeling highly reactive is one of those signs, and we can notice our wounded inner child appears in our daily lives when you find yourself highly reactive to situations, suddenly feeling very detached or irritated. Quote, our adult self is trying to manage or control the outside that's making them feel uncomfortable on the inside, Phillips says. The second one, overvaluing independence. This can look like repeating the narrative, I don't need anyone, like to a very unhealthy extent, and not allowing yourself to ask for any help. Number 3, destructive coping mechanisms. And this can look like coping through too much alcohol, shopping, cheating, gambling, food, and even chronic procrastination. I would argue that that's disassociation. Poor emotional and mental health is number 4. That can show up as depression, feeling unmotivated, wanting more and more time alone or with friends, there's several others, but I'll let you read all those. And then number 5, repeating patterns in your relationships, being avoidant, dismissive, gaslighting yourself, being anxious, having a deep fear of being abandoned. And so those are some attachment style issues. So there's a strong connection between attachment styles and inner child healing work and the symptoms that show that you need it. So those are some of the symptoms that show that you may need to do some inner child healing work. Okay? So what are some of the different modes and types of inner child work? Specific exercises that can help you, and how can these add to your how can you add those to your daily healing practice? So one important point to note here is that while working in and from your mind to do certain inner child exercises is helpful, to get in touch with the inner child and inner children at different ages, you need to get more into your body and into your instincts and into your unconscious mind. This will help you heal the different layers of trauma, disassociation, and pain you may have experienced. It also gets into your neural network, right? It's also good to enjoy play and positive talk with your inner child, since that builds trust within and safety, and you can work more readily with your inner child later. Children operate from feeling and instinct, from the body, and so it's important to connect to your inner child on a deeper, visceral, more body level. These kinds of exercises that I'll show you or tell you about in just a second will be more effective in healing the inner child. There are endless exercises and strategies to help you heal the inner child, including the articles that I'm going to put in the show notes. There's exercises in almost all of them. And some of them, that's what the whole article is exercises. So go through those and experiment and see what works for you. The only way to know is to try. If something doesn't work, try something else, Go through the articles, experiment, see what works. I may create some inner child journals and meditations in the future if I'm able. The positive psychology article has some great exercises and strategies though, and those are concrete exercises. I'll read a couple of them. There's one that's the inner child meditation, and another one that's in positive psychology. And then there's 6 exercises in that article mentioned as well, and there are other exercises in that article. The article also includes worksheets and journals you can use, and then questions a therapist might ask a patient. You could write about those questions in your journal. And so even if it's like ones that are for a therapist to ask a patient, I still think you could work with those by writing about them honestly and feeling into your body and write down your observations in your journal and let yourself release that stuff. Seeing a therapist and doing inner child work with them, with your inner child is also good and advisable, especially if you have a really difficult childhood trauma. Okay, so let me just go over the positive psychology ones really quick. The first one was the inner child meditation, and I won't read all that, but basically there's an inner child meditation here, and there are links to resources and stuff like that, but it says it can help provide stillness and calm to a busy, worried, and upset mind. And then you do it from the breath, so it's from the body. It helps your body to feel calm. It helps you to contact that inner part of yourself, and then you can go from there. And it helps to develop safety and trust in your body. 6 exercises, activities, and techniques. One of them is confronting our defenses. So it's working on your defenses, and that's what IFS really does a lot of. Childhood timeline, I've actually done this in some of the programs I've taken, where you do a timeline of the major events in your life that happened, particularly traumatic ones, from the time you were born until maybe you were adult, 21 years old, something like that. And that one can be difficult and very involved, but it can also be very healing because it helps you to learn to understand your past more thoroughly. And then identifying childhood triggers is another one. And then a conversation with your inner child. I really like this one. And that's sort of like IFS, internal family systems work as well. And then exploring a childhood event, if there was a specific thing that happened or event. And then there's a series of questions here you can ask yourself. What is happening? Who was around? What were your emotions? And so on. And that helps you to explore and bring that stuff up very, very carefully. Don't force. Don't do it too quickly. Do a little bit at a time. Be gentle. Okay? Those are things to keep in mind when you're doing this. And one more is setting internal boundaries. And that's to protect yourself and doing something specific to make sure that you have something to keep parameters around this stuff. And then there's inner child healing workshops and prompts. This is still the positive psychology journal, gratitude journal, self-esteem journal, self-love journal. And then there's the questions for your sessions. And this is addressed to therapists, but I think, like I said, you could do these on your own as well. And then there's other inner child resources here, podcast, journal articles, other articles, books, and so on. So you can just see all these resources. I'm not going to keep on. One last one that I wanted to share with you, though, to kind of wrap all this up so you can know what kind of resources are out there. There's one, CPTSD Foundation has an article that's on inner child work, not just reparenting yourself. The CPTSD Foundation has an article called Healing Trauma Through Inner Child Work by Shirley Davis, and that's the title of the article. And the Bones of Inner Child Work is a section of that, and it says inner child work works to help adults love and accept themselves with their flaws. Although these benefits are not experienced immediately, love and acceptance of oneself will happen with dedicated work. There are many methods for meeting and experiencing your inner child, including any or all of the following. Write out and discuss childhood with the inner child. Reflect upon and discuss childhood trauma with your inner child. Try to cover each stage of life, infancy, toddler, preschool, school age, and so on. With each step, try to recall how you felt. Did you feel safe, afraid, alone, cared for? What were you experiencing internally during each stage of life? Write down any physical sensations and memories you have, even if they are fragmented. Record the tone of voice, words, expressions your parents or others used when interacting with you. Do not be shy, even if a memory seems silly, because the inner child's perceptions are vital to understanding. Writing letters to and from the inner child. Pretend you have been adopted, that you have adopted your inner child. I do that one a lot. And write a letter telling them how much you love and respect them. Tell them how you want to spend time with them and that they are safe with you. It will take time for the inner child living in your psyche to trust you, but it will happen if you are persistent. Do not do all the talking. Allow your inner child to write to you by writing a letter to yourself from the perspective of your inner child using your non-dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, use your left hand. If you're left-handed, use your right hand. It's weird, but apparently it works. Using your non-dominant hand helps you get more in touch with the emotions and feelings of your inner child. It does go on, so I'm not going to read all this, but read this part. It gives a lot of great exercises. Share the pain that is discovered with a trusted person. There's an inner child visualization here. In reading and internalizing supportive affirmations, learning to parent yourself, and keep an inner child work journal. So I'm not going to go through all those because it goes on for a while. But so that was a little bit about exercises, modes and types of inner child work. and how to add those to your daily healing practice. If you find something that works, do it until you go through that process, and then try another strategy and go through that. You might do a meditation daily for a few months or for a few weeks. And so there's a lot of ways you can add this to your daily practice of healing and make it work for you. But you have to experiment and see, trial and error. That's how you figure it out. And, what worked at one time might not work now. What didn't work at one time might work now. So keep that in mind as well. So that's the podcast on inner child work, reparenting yourself, reclaiming your childhood, episode 6 from season 3. And we went over what inner child work is and why it's important. I shared a little bit about the nature of inner child work. I shared a little bit about my experience, why reparenting yourself is an important part of that, how you can know, and some of the symptoms of needing to do inner child work, and the different modes and types of inner child work exercises, and how to add that to your daily practice. Thank you so much for listening. I know some of this gets long and involved, and I really appreciate you following me. If you can support my work, I greatly appreciate it. Patreon is a trusted site where you can do that. You can donate monthly. Check out the YouTube video and hit subscribe bell. Also, there's the Christian Emotional Recovery. They're all called Christian Emotional Recovery. The links are in the show notes. For the Facebook group as well, and ChristianEmotionalRecovery.com. Also, check out the store. There is a gratitude course there that I've added. I've had that for a while. And also there are the Acorn meditations for dealing with difficult emotions. And it's just a set of steps you can go through in a meditation. And it's a bundle of 4 versions of the same meditation. So if you want to support me, those are some ways you can do so. And you can also get something that you can have access to offline with those meditations. Thank you so much for listening to me. Remember that this journey is not easy, but it is so worth it. And God loves you, and you are fearfully made. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Christian Emotional Recovery, hosted by Rachel Leroy. For links to this week's resources and to join the discussion, check out this episode's show notes at ChristianEmotionalRecovery.com, where you can also find links to our YouTube channel and Facebook group. Join our email list and get other episodes and resources. If you enjoyed the podcast, please rate and review the podcast and tell a friend who may benefit from this message. See you next time. And remember, beloveds, God loves you, and you are fearfully and wonderfully made.